Hey, what's going on, guys? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today I want to show you guys how to install Retropie 3.8 on your Raspberry Pi 1, your Raspberry Pi 2, 3, or the Raspberry Pi 0. Now, I know in the past I have made video installs on Retropie 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, so on and so on. This is specifically catered to the people searching for Retropie 3.8 install instructions. If you're new to the Raspberry Pi, congratulations, you just got a super cool little toy to mess with. Now, this thing can do tons and tons of stuff. My favorite is old school game emulation or retro game emulation. Let's get right into it. We're going to need a few things. We're going to have to download a couple things from online. All of this is safe. There's no malware in any of this, any of these applications or anything we're about to download. Let's get right into it. We're going to open up a browser and we're going to head over to retropie.org.uk. We need to come to the Retropie website and we need to download the correct version of Retropie for our Raspberry Pi. Click on download. Now, depending if you have a Raspberry Pi 1 or a Raspberry Pi 0, Raspberry Pi 2 or a Raspberry Pi 3. I am going to install this on a Raspberry Pi 3. So I'm going to click on Raspberry Pi 2 and 3. It's going to download here. It's 909 megabytes. Now, this is a zipped tar file. You can extract it using WinZip or 7-zip if you're using a Windows machine. Now, the next thing we're going to need is Win32 Disk Imager. This is the go-to software for installing operating systems for the Raspberry Pi on an SD card. This is very safe to download. Don't worry about it. It's on SourceForge. There is no malware at all. It's already been downloaded 75,000 times this week. Click on the download button here, and you should be able to download it and install it in no time. Another application that I suggest you get is SD card formatter. Now, what this does, it will allow you to recover your SD card after you install Retropie and you place your SD card back into your computer or a cell phone or something like that. If you want to use it for something else, your SD card will only register as about 200 megabytes. Now, if you're using a 16 gigabyte card, you're probably like, why is this happening? Go ahead and format it with SD card formatter. This will bring it back to the correct size of the SD card. If you're using a SD card that is bigger than 32 gigabytes, you're going to need to download FAT32 format. Now, all of this will be in the description. I will leave links for you guys. To download this, you just click on this picture right here. This is very safe software. It is recommended on the Raspberry Pi website. So I have Retropie 3.8 downloaded. I have Win32 Disk Imager, SD card formatter, and the GUI format, which was the FAT32 format. I'm only going to be using SD card formatter today, Win32 Disk Imager, and my Retropie 3.8 image. Go ahead and open up the folder you downloaded Retropie 3.8 into. And here I have the Raspberry Pi 1 and the Raspberry Pi 0 image. I also have the 2 and the 3 image. I am flashing this to a Raspberry Pi 3, so I'm going to extract my Retropie version 3.8 Raspberry Pi 2 _ Raspberry Pi 3.image. Now, this is a tar file, but we can extract it with 7-zip or WinRAR. I will leave links for both in the description. Go ahead and right-click and extract to a folder. So I'm going to extract this to a new folder, and the new folder's name will be Retropie version 3.8 RPI2 _ RPI3. Alright, so I have extracted my Retropie 3.8 image. It is now 2.6 or 2.7 gigabytes, and it's a disk image file. It is located on my desktop inside of a folder. I'm going to close my Retropie 3.8 folder. I'm going to insert my SD card into my computer. So I am using a 16 gigabyte Samsung micro SD card. As you can see, I am on drive E. Note which drive your SD card is. Just going to right click and properties here. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to show you that this is a 16 gigabyte card. And it is formatted FAT32. Open Win32 Disk Imager by double clicking, or you can right click and run as administrator. In the device area here, you need to have your SD card chosen. Now mine is drive E. You need to make sure you have the correct drive here. This blue folder is how we're going to load the Retropie 3.8 image we just extracted. From here, navigate to where your extracted Retropie 3.8 image is. Mine's on my desktop inside of a folder. We are ready to write or burn the image to the SD card. So I'm going to click on write. This can take a little while depending on the speed of your SD card reader, the speed of your SD card, and the speed of your PC really. So be patient, it will finish. I'm going to click write and fast forward this. So the SD card was flashed successfully. You will get this notification, write successful. Now what we need to do is take our SD card from our computer or laptop, place it into the Raspberry Pi. We are going to boot the Raspberry Pi up. You're going to need a USB controller or a keyboard, your HDMI cable, and your power adapter. So we're going to move to the Raspberry Pi now and plug all our peripherals in and power it on. This is the first boot of the Raspberry Pi with the newly flashed SD card installed. What it's going to do is run through a few little steps. It will expand the file system and it will automatically reboot, and we will be brought to the controller configuration screen. So we're greeted with the welcome screen. It has detected my one gamepad. Now the gamepad that I'm using at the moment is a wireless PS3 controller, but I have it connected with a USB cable. Now your USB cable needs to be a data enabled USB cable. It cannot just be a charging cable. The one that came with the PS3 controller should work fine. I have it connected. It's detected my gamepad. I'm going to hold A, and on my PS3 controller I use my circle button as A. It'll walk you through the steps, so just configure the controller to your liking. And hit your A button when it gets to the OK, whatever you mapped your A to. You'll be brought into the Retropie or emulation station front end. From here, we can see we have a bunch of emulators already installed, and there is also a few games that you can play right now. All of this is freeware, demos, or remakes. So if we go into our ports section, we can see we have Cave Story, Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, Super Mario War. But what we want to do is install some of our favorite games. And if you're scrolling through this and you're looking for, let's say, N64, SNES, NES, PlayStation, you will not see it until you install the ROMs. So right now I'm going to show you how to install ROMs using a USB stick. You can also install ROMs using network, and I recommend using network. But for this tutorial, I will show you the USB ROM install. We're going to leave this running. We're not going to shut it down, and I'm going back to the PC. We need to configure a USB stick. Now I'm going to be using a 8 gigabyte USB 2.0 stick to do this, and it's very simple. So let's go ahead and install some ROMs. You're going to need a USB stick. The one I am using is an 8 gigabyte USB 2.0, and it's an older stick, but it works fine. It needs to be formatted FAT32. So you can right click, format. If you're using a bigger USB stick that is 32 gigabytes or larger, Windows may not be able to format it to FAT32. That's where we're going to use FAT32 formatter, or the GUI formatter I recommended downloading. Since mine is 8 gigabytes, I can just format it directly within Windows. We're going to open up the drive, the USB drive that is formatted FAT32. We're going to create a new folder inside of it and name it Retropie. We have a new folder in here, and inside it is empty. What we need to do is take that USB stick, and while the Raspberry Pi is still powered on and running, mine is still on my desk here, it's running in the background, I am going to take my USB stick that I just created the Retropie folder inside of. I'm going to place it into my Raspberry Pi. What it will do is automatically create folders inside of here. And inside of one of these folders, it will be named ROMs. That's where we're going to place our ROMs. There will be tons of folders named N64, SNES, and we need to put our corresponding ROMs inside. So I'm going to take my USB stick from my computer and place it into my Raspberry Pi now. It's really great to have a light on your USB stick. That way you know that it is transferring. So I have my USB stick here that we just formatted and put a folder inside named Retropie. I'm going to place it into my Raspberry Pi here. And we're going to wait until that light stops flashing. It's going to create folders inside of there. One will be named BIOS, one will be named ROMs, and one will be named configs. We are going to throw our BIOSes inside of the BIOS folder and our ROMs in the corresponding ROMs folder. So mine is now done. I'm going to take the USB stick back out of the Raspberry Pi, place it into my PC again. We're going to transfer some ROMs. The USB stick is now back into the PC, and you can see this is the folder that we created. We're going to open this folder, and inside, Retropie automatically created a BIOS, configs, and ROMs folder. We're going to be focusing on ROMs and BIOSes right now. So open up your ROMs folder, and you can see in here we have all the emulators that are pre-installed. And if you want to install NES games, you place your NES ROMs inside of here. If you want PlayStation 1 games, you put your ROMs in here. Same for everything. SNES, Super Nintendo. I'm going to snap it over here and open up my ROMs folder. And I'm just going to transfer a few ROMs. A few simple, quick ROMs here. SNES. Open my SNES folder here. Or you can just select them and drag them over and place them in the correct folder. It's going to transfer them to the USB stick. So I just put a few SNES ROMs. I will put a few Genesis ROMs. And Genesis was known as the Mega Drive. So your Genesis ROMs will go inside of your Mega Drive folder. Game Boy. No, I don't have many Game Boy Color games. Let's do MAME. And I'll go to, my preferred one is MAME Advanced. Now I know you probably want to play PlayStation 1 games. You're going to need the PlayStation BIOS. So, in our BIOS folder, we're just going to take our PSX BIOS. Mine is the scph1001.bin. Place it in our BIOS folder. We're going to need some ROMs to go along with that. So I will take one PlayStation game. You're going to need the bin and the queue. So if I want to play Tomba, I'm going to need to copy the bin and the queue file and place them inside of my PSX folder. So now that I have my ROMs transferred to my USB stick, what I'm going to do is leave a link to the Retropie wiki page, and it will let you know the ROM extensions and which emulators require BIOSes. So we know that the PlayStation 1 needs a BIOS, Game Boy Advance also needs a BIOS, and there's a few others. But for now, we're going to take that USB stick that we just loaded our ROMs onto, place it back into the Raspberry Pi while it's running, and it's going to transfer the ROMs that we just transferred to the SD card on your Raspberry Pi running Retropie. So I'm going to place my USB stick back into my Raspberry Pi. I just transferred some SNES ROMs, a PlayStation 1 ROM, and a few MAME games. Now this can take a little while depending on how many games you transferred. But the light's going to flash, and this could take anywhere from a minute to 30 minutes, depending on how many games you have to transfer from the USB stick. We're just going to let it sit for a second. See, we're still flashing here. So don't let it trick you. If it stops flashing, just wait a few more minutes. So it's going to transfer all of these ROMs. I'm going to stop this video now. But like I said, just be patient. It will transfer the ROMs to your SD card. So while the ROMs are transferring here, just sit back and relax because you're about to play some awesome retro games on your Raspberry Pi running Retropie 3.8. Now, if you throw, let's say, 200 ROMs on this USB stick, it can take a long time. Now, that's one of the reasons I only threw a few ROMs onto the USB stick. So it looks like my USB stick is done transferring. When you're pretty sure you're done, press start on your controller because none of these games or emulators will show until you do a quick reboot. You can press start on your controller, scroll down to quit, and restart Emulation Station. Now, when we're scrolling through here, we can see we have our MAME, our Mega Drive, which is our Sega Genesis ROMs that we transferred, our PlayStation, our Super Nintendo, and we are ready to play some awesome games. Now, if you transferred N64 ROMs and stuff like that, it will show up. The only ones I did were MAME, Genesis, PlayStation, and SNES for this tutorial. You're ready to play. As long as your controller is set up, you should be able to start a game. Let's go into the Genesis. From here, I'm just going to start Altered Beast. You are now playing some really awesome games. I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. In the description, I'm going to leave links to every webpage that I went to, all the download links, and I also have tutorials on how to set up your Bluetooth controller and configure a lot of other emulators that need configuring with Retropie. Now, these tutorials were based on Retropie 3.7, but they will work with 3.8 no problem. Thanks for watching, guys. If this helped you out, help me out a little bit and hit that like button and subscribe because I have a lot more coming. And like always, Thanks for watching.